All right. So there's a couple of things that I want to discuss with you today. Did you know that Oliver is taking apart the pew?
I don't even know where that is getting from.
It's from behind the cushion thing. So yet another thing that we'll have to take a look at. Yay. All right. So did you know that we are literally in the face of an epidemic? I'm not talking about anything you're going to catch by sitting in close quarters or anything, so don't spread out. I'm not talking about anything you can catch when somebody coughs on you. I'm talking about a complete and utter lack of real knowledge. And this is why I say this is an epidemic. We have at our fingertips something that nobody in history has ever had. We have a library that is so expansive that we can read anything that we want to in an instant. Not only that, but we have the capability to write our own stuff and make it just as available, right? Josh was talking earlier about the availability to actually put out songs, to produce. That's great. And I'm sure that he's going to do a great job, because he has a heart for music and he puts everything into it, and he works with people that do that. The problem is for every Josh that's out there, there's a James. I'm not putting myself down. You need to understand, music is not my area of expertise. I know two good things: Run DMC, king of rap; Queen king of everything else. Done. That's all I need to know, right? So music isn't my forte. If it were up to me to produce something, it would be a little childish. This is how I know. The only rap that I have actually come up with, that I have written, let's see. Let's just say it's a little juvenile. Well, no, not that one, Jacob. That's a new one. That hasn't been dealt with yet. I'm talking about, let's see. It starts out with things like, it's not a mystery, it's history, now here's how it go. It's the story about Jesus and his birth in a stable. You better listen up, because I know you're all able. Now Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem because they had to pay taxes. Man, oh man. But to find a room, they were not able, so they had to spend the night in a smelly old stable. And it just goes on and on and on like that. That is my best work to date. Thank you very much. I'll be available for signing later. I have CDs in the back. No, But we live in a society where the access to not only get the information, but the access to give the information is done with the touch of a button. It means anybody can publish anything that they want to at any time. You don't have to go through publishing companies. You don't have to go through peer review. You don't have to show any actual evidence. I mean, it was a big thing years ago when you had journalists for the New York Times that was caught inventing sources. They don't even bother to invent sources anymore, people. They just post it as if it's real. If you really want to get the heart of what people are talking about, what's on their minds, believe it or not, you have to look at the internet. You look at places like Reddit, Imager. And if you want to go really deep, you look at 9gag. And you're like, what are these things, James? Why would I look at those? That's where the next generation is looking. That's where the next generation is living. That's where all of the information is being shared that they find pertinent to them. One of the strongest threads on Reddit is atheism. It's the largest by far. And it is filled with 12 and 13-year-olds exasperated by their parents because their parents won't forget about the God myth. Their parents won't listen to reason and to logic because God's not logical. We live in a society that is willing and ready to throw anything into our face. And they have the capability of doing that. So it becomes difficult for us. It becomes difficult for us to discern what is real, what is not real, to understand the myth and legend versus reality and history, because anybody can put anything out there and give it to us as if it is truth. Now, this is an epidemic. It is an epidemic of biblical proportions. It is a fact, for instance, that 79% of young adults who come from a Christian upbringing and go off to college do not go to church. 79% of young adult Christians don't go to church. That's pretty huge. That means that, let's see, I've got 3 kids, and 4 kids. Yeah, I've got 4 kids, and if they actually go out to college, I've got a pretty good chance that 3 of them will not go to church anymore. Wow. Why is that? It's because they're not taught core things anymore. They're not taught things that tether them to who Christ is and who God is. They're taught, hey, on Sunday we get dressed up in our best, and we go and we sit in the pew and we spend time, and then we go home. And then maybe we'll watch some football and drink some beer, and maybe we'll go out to lunch. Sunday lunch crowd is, you've all tried to get to restaurants, right? No, it's huge. This is the type of culture that we grow up in, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse year by year as this information becomes available. In 2007, a group of people got together, and they decided that they wanted to put out a movie. They found within their membership someone who proclaimed to be a historian that had academic standing, and they made a movie that is called Zeitgeist. It was originally done in 2007. It was updated in 2012, and now, in addition to the first 2-hour movie, there is now 2 addendums to the movie. It's actually pretty huge. A lot of people know about it. A lot of people think about it. If you are familiar with Russell Brand, you've heard of him before, right? Believe it or not, he is a proponent of the Zeitgeist movement. He doesn't believe, it goes beyond any type of religious aspect. It focuses on religion as a way to control the masses, which is what the government is doing. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that the current people that are in leadership don't do anything for us. They are only there for self-preservation, to put forth their agenda, and they don't do anything to help us out at all. And in protest of that reality, they abstain from voting. They say that it doesn't make sense to participate in the farce. They, put forth different agendas, but they don't actually do anything other than just give information out so that everyone will have an awakening and understand. This is their whole thing. So if you're going to convince people of government conspiracies, if you're going to tell people that religion is just a means by which to take control of people, well, the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to attack religion, right? You're going to have to show that the majority religion, which isn't technically the majority religion anymore, the majority religion that people say that they believe, that they rely on, is false. If you're going to say that something is false, you have to take it down to its very core precepts, and you have to show how they're false. So Zeitgeist has tried to do this. So, with that said, it's not appropriate for me to sit here and tell you this is bad and not show you what it is that I'm talking about. Because if there's one thing that we have always done, it is tell you to go and research these things yourself. I have saved you the time. I have taken and I have edited Zeitgeist down to the 10 minutes that are crucial, that actually pertain to us. And we are going to have a little movie. I didn't bring any popcorn, I apologize. But, Jacqueline, if you will, we are going to watch 10 minutes of Zeitgeist, and I would like you to take very, notes if you want to, for any questions that might come up while you watch it, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So, Jacqueline, go ahead.
This is the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it is simple to understand why, as every morning the sun would rise, bringing vision, warmth, and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of night. Without it, the cultures understood the crops would not grow and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adorned object of all time. Likewise, they were also very aware of the stars. The tracking of the stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn cataloged celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it figuratively passes through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized or personified as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's Son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind. Likewise, the 12 constellations represented places of travel for God's Son, and were identified by names, usually representing elements of nature that happened during that period of time. For example, Aquarius, the water bearer, who brings the spring rains. This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about the solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness, or night. And, metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which, in turn, 3 kings followed to locate and adorn the newborn Savior. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis of Phrygia, born of the Virgin Nana on December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki, with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and upon his death was resurrected. Dionysius of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And upon his death, he was resurrected. Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th, he had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the Truth, the Light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday. The fact of the matter is, there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics. The question remains, why these attributes? Why the virgin birth on December 25th? Why dead for 3 days in the inevitable resurrection? Why 12 disciples or followers? To find out, let's examine the most recent of the solar messiahs. Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary on December 25th in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east, which 3 kings or magi followed to locate and adorn the new Savior. He was a child teacher at 12. At the age of 30, he was baptized by John the Baptist, and thus began his ministry. Jesus had 12 disciples, which he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick, walking on water, raising the dead. He was also known as the King of Kings, the Son of God, the Light of the World, the Alpha and Omega, the Lamb of God, and many, many others. After being betrayed by his disciple Judas and sold for 30 pieces of silver, he was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected and ascended into heaven. First of all, the birth sequence is completely astrological. The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which, on December 24th, aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. These 3 bright stars in Orion's belt are called today what they were called in ancient times, the 3 kings. And the 3 kings and the brightest star, Sirius, all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why the 3 kings follow the star in the east, in order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun. The Virgin Mary is the constellation Virgo, also known as Virgo the Virgin. Virgo in Latin means virgin. The ancient glyph for Virgo is the altered M. This is why Mary, along with other virgin mothers, such as Adonis's mother Myra or Buddha's mother Maya, begin with an M. Virgo is also referred to as the house of bread, and the representation of Virgo is a virgin holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread and its symbol of wheat represents August and September, the time of harvest. In turn, Bethlehem, in fact, literally translates to house of bread. Bethlehem is thus a reference to the constellation Virgo, a place in the sky, not on earth. There's another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolize the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again. This is why Jesus and numerous other sun gods share the crucifixion, 3-day death, and resurrection concept. It is the sun's transition period before it shifts its direction back into the northern hemisphere, bringing spring and thus salvation. However, they did not celebrate the resurrection of the sun until the spring equinox, or Easter. This is because at the spring equinox the sun officially overpowers the evil darkness, as daytime thereafter becomes longer in duration than the night, and the revitalizing conditions of spring emerge. Now, probably the most obvious of all the astrological symbolism around Jesus regards the 12 disciples. They are simply the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which Jesus, being the sun, travels about with. In fact, the number 12 is replete throughout the Bible.
It actually works. There we go. All right, so thoughts? Isn't that fascinating? Did you know all of those facts? No. Right. See, this is an example of what is freely available, and it sounds educated, does it not? Right? There is tons of data that is thrown at you. Language is used to make it sound academic, to make it sound factual. There are many things that are thrown in there with no real, source behind it other than just what the video gives you. Now, it'd be interesting for you to know that there is a companion guide that is available at zekeguides.com that you can either view online or download the PDF. There is one line on page 16 of the companion guide that I felt was really telling of what it is that we've just experienced here. And so I'm just going to quote what it says here. It needs to be understood that the Egyptian stories were never laid out in a linear form. Rather, they appear as bits and pieces in primary sources such as pyramid texts, coffin text, and the Book of the Dead, compiled and altered over many centuries, beginning as early as 7,000 years ago. Thus, it is a common misconception that the myths unfold in the same linear manner as in the Christian narratives. Most of these motifs are indeed not linear narratives, but rather they are symbolic associations derived from different Egyptian texts as well as later mythographers' accounts. Since this description of Horus here is obviously angled from the reference of the point of the Christian narrative, the subject needs to be deconstructed and reconsidered from the standpoint of each motive rather than the overall narrative. The Christian story must, in turn, likewise be considered from the standpoint of each individual motive and not linearly. Because this basic mythist argument is that the Christian religion is a compilation of religious motifs which existed previously and separately. So basically, what the companion guide is telling you is that the Egyptian story of Horus is not found as a complete history narrative of Horus. And there are bits here, there are bits there, there are pieces here, there are pieces there that kind of closely resemble the same story. So if we're to understand how it relates to Christianity, we can't accept the linear Christian narrative in its whole. We have to break apart each individual piece of the narrative and view it that way. That doesn't sound quite right. So if that was the case, then what I would do is I would have to take just a bunch of themes, right? And I would have to break them down and just examine that one theme and not pay attention to anything else around it because it may cloud my judgment and understanding of that one thing. Let's just say for sake of argument that we do that. Let's take a look at what they said about Horus, shall we? Here's a few of the facts that they laid out. So they claimed that Horus was conceived of the Virgin Mother Mary, and also not listed, but his stepfather was Seb, or Joseph. So, in order to compile these truths, I should tell you what I've done. Instead of just researching the internet randomly, I looked specifically for academic papers from accredited professors and theologians and historians. People that have had their works peer-reviewed, that are, shown to actually know what they're talking about, that have done some historical research on these things, that have compiled them together. So, Horus was not conceived of a virgin, and his mother was not named Mary. Horus was born of Osiris. There is no Egyptian text anywhere that associates Osiris with Mary. Osiris was not a virgin. She literally had her husband resurrected. She had the crocodile god retrieve the individual pieces of her husband's body. There were 14 pieces. She only managed to recover 13. So the impregnation was done when she herself fashioned a golden phallus and attached that to her husband and proceeded to impregnate herself. Like the show said, right? There is no evidence of any three wise men as part of the Horus story. Seb, which is supposedly the stepfather, was actually the earth god, and he is not Horus's earthly father, and he's not the equivalent of Joseph. Seb is usually described as Osiris's. That's Horus's mother, described as her father. So, that's just that one. Let's see. Horus was born in a cave. His birth announced by angels, heralded by a star, and attended by shepherds. In actuality, there is literally zero reference to any type of cave or manger in the Egyptian birth story of Horus. In fact, none of these details are present. Horus was born in a swamp. It was not heralded by angels, and there was no star. Horus, it is claimed that Horus attended a special rite of passage at the age of 12. And there is no information from age 12 to 30 at the time he was baptized, but by Anup the baptizer, and started his ministry. Would it surprise you to know that there is literally zero continuous effort put into Horus's mythology? There is no accounting for any of the information between his birth and when he supposedly starts a ministry. It's really just he was born and the rest of it. He is never seen. I think my mic fell. Boom. Again, I apologize for no popcorn. All right. Also, there is no such person in any Egypt mythology called Anup the baptizer. There is no claim that such a person that never existed was beheaded. because, again, there is no such person in Horace's history. Horace, it was claimed Horace has 12 disciples. In reality, there were 4 disciples. They were called the Heru Shemsu. And at some point in history, there is a reference to 16 followers, but they were joined with an unnumbered amount in a battle called the Battle of Mesnui. It is claimed that Horace performed many miracles, exorcising demons, raising from the dead, walking on water. There is no mention specifically of any of these things. I'm sure that they have ascribed some, miracles to Horace, but the ones that were listed out specifically, there is no record of those at all. There is no record of Horace being crucified, buried for 3 days, and resurrecting. Horace is not even reported to have died at all. Usually, he basically comes and goes as the sun rises and the sun sets. In fact, in midday, he is said to actually become his father. None of these are in Egyptian history. There's also a claim that Horace came to fulfill the law. The question then would become what law, because there is no such thing as the Egyptian law for Horace to fulfill. That's just some of the facts. What about the December 25th birth? That's fascinating. That's fascinating. And that is, in reality, the linchpin of the whole Zeitgeist story, is that it is December 25th, right? Because all the signs, you have the star, you have the 3 wise men of Orion's belt that are following the star, pointing to the sun's lowest point. When was Jesus born? Right. Most likely sometime in the spring. Why do we celebrate his birth on December 25th? Yes. Did you get that? Okay. It jives with other pagan holidays that are already being celebrated. The Catholic Church at the time, because they could not stop the celebration, decided to make it a celebration of Christ instead. So, we do not actually believe that Christ was born on December 25th. These are facts as actually researched and put out there. They are not attached to the Zeitgeist movie at all, but this is done after some extensive research. The other claim is there is various other gods that this ascribes to. Krishna was listed. It was listed that Krishna was born of a virgin. I find that hard to believe personally. If you understand if you understand the beliefs around Krishna, he was one of 8 children, and he was the 8th child born. Right. See, a lot of this just doesn't stand up when you look at it. There's also one of the popular ones. You can, go to Google, type this in, Mithra. They mentioned Mithras. If you type Mithra versus Jesus, you'll get a nice, and you look at images, you'll get a nice graphic that lists out Mithra, and it lists out Christ, and then it says, Christians, why you know research. So let's examine Mithras, because that is the most popular, right? Mithras, born of a virgin on December 25th in a cave and attended by shepherds. Would it surprise you to know that Mithras was actually born out of a rock? It left a hole, so that could be a cave. His birth is celebrated on 25th, but first Christians actually knew that to not be the date of Christ's birth, so I'm not sure why that's even something we're worried about here. Mithras, considered a great traveler and master. There is literally nothing in the Mithraic tradition that says he was a teacher of any kind. He could have been considered a master of sorts. but most mythologies really describe their historic, their figures as teachers, right? Mithras promised his followers immortality. While there is a little bit of evidence for this, quite honestly, who pretends to be a god and doesn't? Let's think about that, right? Mithras performed miracles. Okay. Probably we'll give them that. The performing of miracles, does that mean that you're a deity, that you're a god, that you're the Son of God? Is Jesus known only because he performed miracles? No. Mithras was called the Good Shepherd. No. Mithras is a sun god, and believe it or not, he's associated with bulls. Bulls. Mithras is the baptizer. Now, this one's interesting. You all know what baptism for Christians entails, correct? So, water. So if you were a follower of Mithras, your baptism would include crawling into a pit with a bull suspended over you, alive. Then the priests would slit the bull's belly and you would be baptized in its blood and guts. Can you not see the similarities? And I can go on and on and on, and I can literally give you facts about every single one of the supposed saviors that the Zeitgeist movie shown you. Not only Zeitgeist, but atheism websites. There's a website, POCM.info. And it is a very long website that you click on page by page by page, and it tells you why anyone that has a thinking brain in their head would believe, why they wouldn't believe that Christ is unique in story, that Christ is not copied from other myths. Because, let's think logically here. And that's what the whole website is dedicated to. Someone spent a lot of time. So here's a couple of things that we're working with. First of all, you have, this is taken, by the way, from the Case for the Real Jesus. In case you're interested, is the book we're going through all year. It is available from our online repository. And if you need help obtaining that, we can help you with that. So first of all, you have the copycat proponent, which basically illogically assumes that just because two things exist side by side, one of them must have caused the other. That makes sense, right? Two things going on at the same time, obviously that caused the other thing. Second, many alleged similarities are exaggerated or fabricated. Do you notice that the description of Horus in the movie used very Christian terms to describe it, even including calling his mother Osiris Mary, even though that's not found anywhere in the Egyptian text? Third. I just skipped third. I'm just going to stop saying what number it is. Next. All right. The next one. Paul would never have consciously borrowed from pagan religions. In fact, he warned against this very thing in his writings. We know that this is an original story. We know that from the Bible itself. The vast majority of what we learned is available in the Bible. It's not the only source. There are Jewish historians as well that do talk about the fact that Jesus was around. Even if it's just one line, he is mentioned. So we know that to be true. early Christianity, fifth or sixth or fourth, wherever I was. Early Christianity was very exclusive. I wrote down a word that doesn't exist, so I'm just using exclusive. It's very exclusive. Any hint of synchronizing with any other religion or mythologies would not have been allowed. Next, unlike other mystery religions, Christianity is grounded in an actual historical event, several historical events. And 7, what few parallels remain could be reflecting a Christian influence actually on the pagan beliefs. The huge one I said is Mithras. Believe it or not, we have 0 writings of anything related to it until the 3rd century. This is well after Christianity had a foothold even in the Roman Empire. So, what does this mean for us? There is a lot of information that is out there, and we have to be very discerning of the information that we have. Not only that, we have to pass on that information to the next generation so that they not only are, understanding of what that is, but are able to defend what it is that they believe. I read you that statistic earlier that 79% of young adults who grew up in Christian homes leave the church. That's a very real and growing thing. And the problem is, just as described, we do our Sunday thing and that's it. We have a lot of teaching that is just the basic feel-good part of Scripture. I'm not sure if you've read the Bible at all, but it doesn't always feel good, right? There's no meat that is taught in a lot of churches today, unfortunately. I know I personally wasn't taught a lot of meat stuff. It was my own studying, and Sunday sermons were pretty much just you tried to stay awake while the guy talked for a while. At least I provide a movie. So, here's the thing. We know it's been shown that in order for a myth to take hold, it takes at least 2 generations before that myth can enter into the historical account. Now, why is that? Because within the first 2 generations, there are eyewitnesses. There's people who can corroborate. There's people who can say, no, that didn't happen. Is that what happened with Christianity? It's not a myth. We have actual people accounting. How do we know this to be true? Well, we can see right here. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 15. Now, if we did not have eyewitnesses, if we did not have personal accounts that could not be refuted, why would it make sense for this to even be written? 15 verses 3 through 9. Whose Bible is this? I like it, but... All right. 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 9. I passed on to you what was most important and what has also been passed on to me. Christ died for our sins, just as Scripture said. He was buried. He raised from the dead on the 3rd day, just as the Scripture said. He was seen by Peter and then by the 12. Now, mind you, at the time that this is written, Peter was still there, still alive, right? The 12, okay, so we have sources. After that, he was seen by more than 500 of his followers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he was seen by James and later by all the apostles. And last of all, as though I had been born at the wrong time, I also saw him. For I am the least of all the apostles. In fact, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle after the way I persecuted the church. So, Why would Paul say, hey, here's all these names of people that you can verify that these events actually took place? Unless the events maybe actually took place. It'd be too easy for them to be refuted. The New Testament attests to the fact that the first century Jesus was not mistaken for any other God. Where can we look to verify that information? Let's turn to our Bibles. We have that available to us. Turn to Acts. Acts chapter 17. And I'm going to actually start in verse 16. So Acts chapter 17, verse 16. While Paul was waiting in Athens, he was deeply troubled by the idols he saw everywhere in the city. He went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and he spoke daily in the public square to all who happened to be there. He also had a debate with some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. When he told them about Jesus and his resurrection, they said, are you ready for this? They said, what is this babbler trying to say with these strange ideas he's picked up? Others said, he seems to be preaching about some foreign gods. Well, let me just ask you a question. If these myths were replete without history and they repeated over and over and they are found through generations and people, why have these people never heard this? He's literally in a place replete with idols and gods, and they find the story of Jesus to be strange. Just think about that. It's kind of interesting. So supposedly a religion that borrows from other myths is somehow not like the other myths. How is that? Because it doesn't actually borrow from the other myths. So, what have we learned today? Well, there's a lot of information out there, isn't there? There's just stuff that's available at our fingertips. There's a lot of myths that have to do with deities and death and dying and, resurrection, supposedly. You have to be very discerning. You have to look at your resources. The questions that you need to ask, though, are, things like, what is the source of this information? I love the internet. I carry it with me everywhere I go. In fact, I was almost in tears the other day because my actual phone that I use on a regular basis stopped working. My wife can attest to this. And I'm using this. It's so thin and small. It is. It's so slow. I enjoy all the benefits that the internet has brought to me. I can listen to music anywhere I want. I can make phone calls anywhere I want over the internet, even if I don't have cell service. It's amazing what I can do over the internet. But with that, it's really just a repository at this point for anybody to upload any information that they want to. What is the biggest scandal of the presidential election? Well, fake news, right? That's all they're talking about. Fake news this, fake news that. Trump cries out, this is a fake news story. Everyone says, what about all these fake ones about you? It's a back and forth. It's all about fake news. Any information can be shared. There is no fact-checking. There is no research that's gone into it. There are no sources that make sense. You have to look for those sources. All this information is available to you. Now, why is it that I'm asking you to do all of that work now? Because 79% of our children, by the time they go to college, will probably leave the church. That's what statistics tell us. That means that they weren't prepared for what it was that they were walking into. That means that instead of saying, listen, this is a reality that's out there. These are things that are being said. This is what you need to be prepared for. we do things like say, oh, you don't have to worry about that. We don't show it to them. We protect them from it because, well, they might ask questions. That's because we're not prepared to answer those questions. So we have to prepare ourselves to be able to answer those questions. So when those questions get asked when they're older, they won't say, ooh, that's a new idea. I never heard about that. Why did my parents ever tell me about this? Obviously, my parents don't know anything, therefore I know everything now because my professor has taught me all this. There are numerous studies that link myths to Christianity. And most of those do not have literal basic facts to it. Even Zeitgeist, the supposed historian, has literally zero credentials. And even in the research that was done shows lack of discipline in research. Why else would they have fixated on December 25th as the birth date of Christ? It's a sloppy detail because Christians should know that that is not when we believe Christ was actually born. But I bet you if you go to some other churches, there are Christians that, he's the reason for the season, right? We need to combat that. We can no longer be uneducated, blind followers of anything. Did you hear what I said? Don't be a blind follower. I do not want you to practice blind faith. Because if you're practicing blind faith, that means that you have literally nothing to go off of, and you just want to believe. The God presented in the Bible, my God, has left so many pieces of evidence around for me. I don't know if you know, I like electronics. I think very logically in my thought. If there was not evidence, I can tell you quite honestly, I would not be a Christian. I don't do good on feelings. There is evidence there, but you have to actually research. You have to actually dig. You have to actually pay attention. And when people throw things up and say, well, look, this is just like Christ, is it really? What is the source of the information that you're providing me? Can you show me any footnotes that you've taken in your research? Who is it that you've talked to about this? Can you show me any of the original documents that you've looked at for this? These are basic questions, and I would ask you to do that. So, in conclusion today, I think that we can safely say the claim that Jesus is a copy of mythological gods originated with authors whose work have been discounted by academia. They contain logical fallacies, and they cannot even compare to the New Testament Gospels. The Gospels have withstood 2,000 years of intense scrutiny, and they keep withstanding. Every archaeological dig that has sought out to refute the Bible has done nothing more than affirm what has taken place. The alleged parallels between Jesus and other gods disappear when they are examined, when the original material is looked at. The Jesus is a myth theory relies on selective descriptions, redefining words, and making false assumptions. Remember, the story of Horus is not found linearly. There are bits and pieces. So obviously we must break apart Christianity and its linear story. Then just look at bits and pieces. It's a ridiculous logic. So I want you to ask yourself a couple questions. Does the Jesus you know live up to scrutiny? It's a simple question. Are you prepared to have those discussions? And more importantly, have you prepared others to have those discussions? And if so, how have you done that? Now, I do apologize. I did say that I had CDs in the back. I do not. But it is time for us to gather together in our cell groups to discuss those questions and more, and then we'll meet back here for communion.